In 1980, 4 nuns from Northern California vanished without a trace, plunging their close-knit community into mourning and bewilderment. 28 years later, a priest uncovers the horrifying truth behind their disappearance. The morning sun, streaming through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Church, scattered rainbow hues across the polished wooden pews. Father Elroy Smith stood at the altar, his voice solemn yet firm, as he concluded the memorial prayer. "May the souls of the departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace," he intoned, making the sign of the cross. "Amen." The congregation responded in unison. Father Elroy surveyed the gathering. Faces, from elderly to young parishioners, were turned toward him. They had all come on this somber day to honor the memory of the 4 nuns who had vanished without a trace exactly 28 years ago. The mystery surrounding the small town of Oak Haven, California, had haunted its residents for nearly 3 decades. After the service, Father Elroy stood at the church entrance, greeting each parishioner. Many offered condolences, though over the years the words had become more of a tradition than an expression of fresh grief. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Harmon," Father Elroy said, clasping the elderly woman's wrinkled hands. "Your presence means a great deal." "I always come, Father," she replied, unshed tears glimmering in her eyes. "I still remember Sister Evelyn teaching my children catechism. Such a kind soul." Father Elroy nodded, feeling the familiar ache. Sister Evelyn Baxter was 68 years old when she disappeared. Her life dedicated to serving God cut short by the tragedy that befell her and the 3 other nuns. One by one, the parishioners departed, each carrying their own memories of the vanished women. Sister Evelyn Baxter, 68. Sister Carol Sterling, 65. Sister Elaine Davis, 28. And the youngest, Sister Alice, 23. For Father Elroy, the wound was particularly deep. Sister Alice was his own sister, and her disappearance had shaken his faith to its core. As the last parishioner left the church, Father Elroy slowly walked through the emptying space. The sound of Father Elroy's footsteps echoed in the silence of the hallway as he made his way to his study, located in the depths of the building. The modest room, furnished with a simple desk, a bookshelf filled with theological works, and a window overlooking the serene cemetery, served as his personal sanctuary. Once finally alone, Father Elroy sank into his chair, covering his face with his hands. The mask he diligently wore for his parishioners shattered, revealing a weary man consumed by grief and tormented by unresolved questions. "Why, Lord?" he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "I have served you faithfully for so many years. My sister dedicated her life to you. Why didn't you lead me to them? What lesson am I meant to learn from this ordeal?" Tears, like beads, seeped through his fingers as his shoulders shook with silent sobs. He rarely allowed himself such moments of weakness, but the anniversary of the tragedy invariably breached his carefully constructed defenses. After several minutes, Father Elroy took a deep breath, wiping his eyes. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and retrieved a small, polished wooden box. Inside were photographs, carefully preserved despite the passing years. The first captured Alice on the day of her final vows. Her youthful face radiated joy and determination, framed by a veil, and Father Elroy felt both pride and a pang of guilt as he gazed at the image. He was the one who had nurtured her faith, who had supported her calling. He vividly remembered their conversations when she was just 16, her eyes burning with conviction as she shared her dreams of service. "I was so proud of you," he whispered to the photograph, his voice barely audible. "And I still am." The thought that had haunted him for 28 years crept into his mind once more. If I hadn't encouraged her religious vocation, would she be here today? Would she be a mother, a teacher, alive and well, instead of... In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Father Elroy said sharply, making the sign of the cross to banish the treacherous thoughts. He could not allow himself to doubt the plans of the Lord, even in his darkest moments. Setting down Alice's photograph, he picked up another, the last known image of the 4 missing nuns. They were sitting together on a wooden bench near the small, secluded St. Jude's Chapel, located near the edge of Redwood National Park. Sisters Evelyn and Carol, the eldest, sat with their hands resting quietly in their laps, their wrinkled faces exuding peace. Beside them, Sister Elaine, her posture more relaxed, but her gaze reverent. And next to her, Alice, the youngest, whose eyes burned with determination even in the faded photograph. Taken by a local visitor just days before their disappearance, the photograph captured their final moments. They set off for St. Jude's Chapel for a short spiritual retreat. 2 days of fasting, prayer, and silence in anticipation of the Catholic saint's feast day. The diocese had also tasked them with assessing the condition of the old chapel to decide its fate, restoration or decommissioning. Sister Alice, known for her attention to detail, was asked to document the structure's condition. Father Elroy stared at the image, his mind returning again and again to calculations he had run countless times. Sister Evelyn would be 96 now. Sister Carol, 93. Even if they had miraculously survived what had happened to them, they would be frail, elderly women. But Elaine would be 56, and Alice just 51, and they could be in their prime. He remembered the feverish days and weeks after their disappearance. The police thoroughly searched the forest, combing the undergrowth and climbing the slopes of the nearby mountains. Search parties spread out across the surrounding farms, villages, and towns, but not a single clue was ever found. No scraps of clothing, no personal belongings, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the 4 women had simply vanished into thin air. The official explanation, in the end, settled on a bear attack. Redwood National Park was renowned for its wildlife, including black bears that could become aggressive if threatened. Perhaps the sisters had wandered too far into the woods and encountered a predator, but the complete lack of evidence had always made that explanation ring hollow for Father Elroy, and for many others. Over the years, more sinister rumors spread, whispers that the nuns had broken their vows and run off to start new lives. Father Elroy and the church had worked tirelessly to quash these speculations, but the seeds of doubt had been sown in the community. Alice would never do that, he whispered, tracing his finger over his sister's face in the photograph. His voice cracked. She would never leave without telling me. Continuing to look at the photograph, his gaze shifted to the chapel visible in the background. St. Jude's, a modest child of the 1920s, nestled among the sprawling trees as if hiding from the world. White walls, crowned with a modest bell tower, rose in the shadows, behind the nuns, as if reminding of the simplicity of faith. Father Elroy, frozen in amazement, felt something painfully stab in his chest. For over 20 years he had avoided this place, considering the memories too sharp to relive. But today, on this tragic day, he was drawn here, to this place where his sister once walked, where she offered her prayers. Just sentimentality, he thought, a desire to feel her presence on this difficult day. Or perhaps it was a quiet whisper, penetrating the depths of his consciousness, a whisper that something was missed, a detail that escaped the eye 28 years ago. Foolishness, pure foolishness. What else can be found? And yet, an irresistible attraction. Father Elroy carefully folded the photos into a box, except for one, where 4 nuns stood by the walls of St. Jude's. He carefully hid it in his pocket. Getting up from the table, he took the Bible and rosary and left his office, full of determination. In the church parking lot, he got into his modest sedan, placing the photo on the passenger seat. He bowed his head, saying a short prayer for direction. Then he turned the ignition key, and the car moved from St. Michael's, heading towards the forest, into the embrace of the ghosts of the past. The winding road from Oakhaven to Redwood National Forest led him through a series of changing landscapes. Well-kept houses and shops were replaced by scattered farms, which in turn gave way to wildlife. Tall pines and cedars, like guards, crowded the roadside, their shadows falling on the asphalt. An hour and a half of the journey gave Father Elroy time for reflection. He remembered how often he had made this journey in the weeks after the nuns disappeared. His car was then plastered with leaflets depicting Alice, and his heart was torn with desperate hope. Now he carried only memories, reconciled to the mystery that had forged his life. When the road, winding, began to climb into the foothills, Father Elroy slowed down. St. Jude's Chapel nestled in a tiny clearing at the edge of the forest. It could be reached by a modest dirt road that ran from the main road. He peered at the roadside, looking for a familiar turn. Reaching what he thought was the right place, Father Elroy frowned in confusion. Instead of a simple dirt road that was etched in his memory, he was faced with a paved private road, blocked by a luxurious gate. A no trespassing sign was next to signs warning of private property. "It can't be," he muttered, parking his car on the side of the road. He checked the picture he brought with him, comparing the background with what he saw. The mountains in the distance matched, as did the location of the tall trees on the ridge. The place was exactly right. But where was St. Jude's Chapel? Father Elroy got out of his car and approached the gate. Beyond it, a private drive disappeared into the thick woods, but there was no sign of a white chapel building. Instead, the grounds seemed meticulously landscaped with ornamental trees and shrubs lining the driveway. Puzzled, he reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found James Anderson's number, the longtime caretaker of St. Jude's. They hadn't spoken in years, but Father Elroy hoped the man was still around and could offer some clarity. The phone rang several times before a gravelly voice answered. "Hello, James. This is Father Elroy Smith from St. Michael's in Oakhaven." A pause, then recognition. "Father Elroy, it's been years. How are you doing?" "I'm doing well, thank you," Father Elroy replied, though that was far from the truth. "James, I'm standing at what I believe is the entrance to St. Jude's, but the chapel doesn't seem to be here." Another pause, this time longer. "That's right, Father. The diocese decommissioned the chapel many years ago. Sold it off in 1982 to a man named Walter Blackwood. He had it torn down." Father Elroy felt a disturbing chill despite the gentle warmth of the sunny day. "I've never heard of a chapel being sold, let alone torn down," he managed to say. "Well, after what happened with the nuns, the congregation dwindled considerably. And then there was that incident with the crack in the steeple. Poor Robert Jones was nearly killed. The bishop decided it was too much of an expense to maintain for such a small community." James spoke matter-of-factly, but Father Elroy, without realizing it, was staring intently at the no trespassing sign as a growing unease washed over him. "And does this Walter Blackwood still own the land?" "Yes," James nodded. "He's got quite the estate there. The main house is off to the side, near where the woods get thickest. The chapel site is just part of his property now." "I see," Father Elroy said slowly. "I was hoping to visit the chapel today for personal reasons. An anniversary, you understand." His voice trailed off. James's tone softened with understanding. "Of course, 28 years today, isn't it? I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing, Father." "Do you know if Mr. Blackwood receives visitors? Perhaps if I explained the situation." "To be honest, he's not known for being hospitable," James replied cautiously. "A bit of a recluse, from what I hear. Keeps to himself. Doesn't socialize much with the locals." Father Elroy sighed, disappointment settling heavily on his shoulders. "Well, thank you for the information, James. I appreciate it. Listen, Father. James's tone brightened slightly. I still live nearby, no more than 15 minutes from here. I salvaged some items from the chapel when it was decommissioned. The old altar cross, some prayer books, things like that. You're welcome to come by and take a look if you'd like. That's very kind of you, Father Elroy replied. I may take you up on that, but I'd like to try and speak with Mr. Blackwood first. Do you happen to know how one might reach his main house? James hesitated for a moment. Well, there's the private drive you're looking at, but that gate's always locked. There's a public road that winds around. It'll get you close enough to his property. After getting directions from James, Father Elroy thanked him and ended the call. He returned to his car, conflicted, contemplating his next move. Part of him urged him to respect Walter Blackwood's privacy and head straight to James's house. The other part felt an undeniable pull toward the road leading to the Blackwood estate. 20 minutes later, Father Elroy was driving along a narrow lane that bordered Blackwood's property. Through gaps in the trees, he could see manicured lawns and, in the distance, a formidable structure that resembled a mountain lodge. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. 3 stories of stone and timber, with expansive windows and multiple terraces overlooking the woods. The building exuded wealth, seeming out of place in the humble countryside. Father Elroy parked his car in a small area near what appeared to be a service entrance. He straightened his clerical collar, took a deep breath, and walked toward the imposing house, feeling both determined and apprehensive. As he approached the main entrance, his path led along a stone walkway lined with meticulously maintained gardens and a small ornamental pond. The magnificence of the place was undeniable, and yet Father Elroy felt a sense of unease, as if he were an uninvited guest. He walked up the steps to the front door and knocked firmly, but not too loudly, on the heavy oak panel. The door opened almost instantly, revealing a tall, athletic man in his late 60s, dressed in expensive leisure wear. His gray hair was neatly trimmed, and he held a leather dog leash in his hand. The man's expression shifted instantly from neutral expectation to outright displeasure when he noticed Father Elroy's clerical collar. "Yes?" he asked sharply, making no attempt to hide the irritation in his voice. "Good day." Father Elroy attempted a warm smile. "Are you Mr. Walter Blackwood?" The man's jaw tightened. "I am, and you're trespassing, as a matter of fact." "I apologize for the unannounced visit. My name is Father Elroy Smith from St. Michael's Church in Oakhaven." He extended his hand, but Walter Blackwood didn't even flinch to shake it. "What do you want?" Blackwood demanded, his fingers clenching the leash. Father Elroy lowered his hand, maintaining his composure despite the blatant hostility. "I was hoping you might have a few minutes to talk. You see, I visited the site where St. Jude's chapel used to stand, and was surprised to find it was no longer there. If you already saw it wasn't there, why bother me?" Blackwood's voice took on a menacing edge, bordering on a growl. "I spoke with James Anderson, the former caretaker. He mentioned that you acquired the property." "So? You gonna accuse me of buying land that was up for sale?" Blackwood stepped forward as if to attack, forcing Father Elroy to step back. Fury blazed in his eyes. "Are you one of those people who think that land is sacred? The diocese didn't think so when they sold it." "No, no," Father Elroy said quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of appeasement. "I'm not blaming you at all. I was just hoping to inquire about the circumstances. The chapel held personal significance for me, and I wasn't aware it had been demolished." For a moment, Blackwood's face seemed to soften, but the coldness in his eyes remained. "Well, now you know. It's gone, and good riddance. I can sleep soundly now that I don't have to listen to that blasted bell ringing 3 times a day, giving me migraines." Father Elroy couldn't help but respond. "The Angelus bell is a beautiful tradition, Mr. Blackwood. It calls the faithful to the Lord's Prayer and honors the incarnation of God. It's a reminder of holy things, of our deliverance from sin and death. "Oh, spare me the sermon," Blackwood sneered, twisting his lips. "People can set alarms on their phones if they need a reminder to pray. They don't need to disturb the whole neighborhood with medieval noise pollution." The conversation was clearly not going well. Father Elroy decided to try a different approach, trying to defuse the tension. "I understand you value your privacy, Mr. Blackwood, and I've intruded on your time. I apologize. Perhaps we could speak another day, when it's more convenient for you." "There won't be another day," Blackwood snapped, his voice ringing with steel. "I'm not interested in discussing a building that's been gone for a decade with a priest I've never seen before. Now, I suggest you leave before I call the sheriff and report you for trespassing." Father Elroy nodded, realizing further attempts were futile. "Very well. Thank you for your time, Mr. Blackwood. Peace be with you." The only response was the slamming of the door in his face. Father Elroy sighed and turned, heading down the stone path toward his car. The encounter left him with a sense of disappointment and unease. There was something more than mere rudeness in Blackwood's demeanor. It was antipathy, something deeply personal, directed against the church and its ministers. He glanced back at the imposing house, wondering what lay hidden behind its walls. Was Blackwood watching him from one of the upper windows? The feeling of being watched prickled at the back of his neck. Father Elroy settled into the driver's seat, starting the engine. Two desires warred within him: to return to Oak Haven or to visit James Anderson, as he had promised. Perhaps contemplating the surviving relics from St. Jude's would bring him the long-awaited peace he had come here seeking. Pulling away from the Blackwood estate, Father Elroy steered the car down the road, which ran close to where the chapel once stood. He couldn't explain the compulsion. After all, there was nothing to see there. But something drew him back in that direction. The car rounded a bend, and the site where St. Jude's once stood came into view. Through the trees, he could see the cleared area where a small building stood, now adorned with decorative shrubs. Suddenly, the car radio hissed, emitting a strange, bone-chilling sound. Father Elroy gasped, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He knew that sound well. Gregorian chant, the ancient, ethereal music of monastic worship. But the radio was off. He distinctly remembered turning it off as he left Oak Haven. Father Elroy parked the car on the shoulder, staring at the radio in stunned disbelief. The singing lasted for only a few seconds, then vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, reaching for the radio. He turned it on, then off again, but the mysterious singing didn't return. Was he imagining things? A trick of his weary mind? Or some bizarre electrical fault in his old car? But as he sat there, he felt an odd sensation, the same one that had washed over him when he'd looked at the photograph in his office. A tug at his heart, an inexplicable certainty that he was meant to be here, now, for a purpose he didn't yet understand. The hairs on his arms stood on end. A warmth spread through his ears. Physical sensations he'd experienced during moments of intense prayer or spiritual insight. In the seminary, his spiritual advisor had taught him to recognize them as potential stirrings of the Holy Spirit. And then again, the faint singing came from the silent radio, and this time, Father Elroy was sure he wasn't imagining it. Like a whisper from beyond, an unseen force beckoned him, guiding him down paths unknown. As if in a trance, Father Elroy turned the car around and headed back toward the gates that barred the way to where the chapel once stood. Whatever awaited him, he felt an overwhelming need to investigate, even if it meant another confrontation with the grim Walter Blackwood. He parked his car on the shoulder, right by the gates that marked the entrance to the Blackwood property. No trespassing signs glared at him, seeming to mock his intentions. Father Elroy hesitated, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. Doubts gnawed at his soul, his mind wrestling with what he was about to do. "Lord, guide me," he whispered, praying for clarity. If I am wrong, show me the right path. But the strange, almost mystical feeling wouldn't leave him. After a short but agonizing pause, Father Elroy got out of the car. He was acutely aware that he was trespassing, an act that went against his moral principles as a priest. But the mysterious singing from the radio seemed to have awakened something more than just duty in him, a conviction that went beyond the ordinary. Instead of trying to break through the gate, Father Elroy began to walk along the fence line, looking for a way to see the site of the former chapel. The fence was formidable, 8 feet high and made of sturdy metal, but it followed the contours of the rolling terrain, dipping closer to the ground in places. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to recall the layout of St. Jude's as it once was. If his memory served him correctly, the wooden bench where the nuns had been photographed had stood to the east of the chapel, near a large oak tree. Opening his eyes, he scanned the property beyond the fence, looking for landmarks that might have survived the demolition. The oak tree was gone, probably cut down during Blackwood's renovations, but a cluster of pine trees that had stood behind the chapel remained, giving him a point of reference. Father Elroy continued his trek along the fence, getting closer to where he believed the chapel had once stood. His foot suddenly caught on an exposed tree root, and he stumbled, nearly falling. He reached out to steady himself, his fingers grasping the cold metal of the fence, but the force of his fall was too great. The fence seemed to give way under his weight. There was a cracking sound, a harbinger of trouble, as a weak connection failed, creating a gaping hole, wide enough for a person to crawl through. Father Elroy found himself half on the Blackwood property, the broken fence lying treacherously beneath him. "Oh, Lord," he gasped, pushing himself to his feet and brushing the dirt off his cassock. It had never been his intention to damage the fence, much less create a means of entering private land. But here he was, face to face with an unexpected opportunity. Or was it a temptation? Father Elroy looked around, making sure no one had witnessed his unintentional transgression. The road was deserted, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. He glanced at the broken fence, then at the clearing beyond, where St. Jude's had once stood. "Forgive me," he whispered, crossing himself, before cautiously stepping through the breach. His heart was pounding. Once on the Blackwood property, he made his way toward the site of the former chapel, with quick but careful steps. The grounds were manicured, adorned with foreign ornamental plants that seemed out of place amidst the natural forest. Nothing hinted at the fact that this had once been a place of worship. No foundation stones, no cross, not even a humble memorial. The absence of anything filled Father Elroy with deep sadness. It seemed that Walter Blackwood had deliberately erased all traces of the chapel's existence, destroying not only the building, but also the very memory of it. As he stood there, lost in thought, a glint of light caught his eye. Something near the ground, partially hidden by the ornamental shrubs. Curiosity got the better of him. Father Elroy moved closer, and pushing the branches aside, discovered a metal grate set into the ground. The vent. It appeared old and weathered, the iron bars rusted with age. Father Elroy frowned, puzzled. If the chapel had been completely demolished, why maintain this old vent? And why would a manicured property with no structures require ventilation at all? He crouched by the vent, peering into it with curiosity. The design seemed to transport one back in time, to the 30s or 40s, with intricate scrollwork along the edges. It certainly didn't fit the modern, minimalist aesthetic that the Blackwood estate was known for. As he drew closer, he caught a sound, so faint that Father Elroy initially dismissed it as his imagination. But then it came again, a soft, melodic hum, followed by a distinct human cough. The blood in Father Elroy's veins turned cold. The hum was reminiscent of Gregorian chants he'd once heard on the radio in his car, but this wasn't electrical interference, nor was it a figment of his imagination. Someone was beneath the ground, under where St. how Jude's chapel had once stood. "Hello?" he called softly, leaning closer to the grate, but the humming continued, as if oblivious to his presence, indicating a significant distance from the source. Father Elroy straightened, his mind racing. The implications were disturbing. Why would there be an underground space beneath the former chapel site? And more importantly, who was down there? He glanced around, half expecting Walter Blackwood to appear, rage in his eyes, but the grounds were serene and seemingly deserted, at least in this area. The main house was obscured by a cluster of trees, and there were no visible security cameras nearby. Reaching into his pocket, Father Elroy pulled out his cell phone and dialed 911, his hand trembling slightly as he held it to his ear. 911, what's your emergency? A dispatcher's voice answered. My name is Father Elroy Smith, he replied, trying to keep his voice down despite his seeming solitude. I'm on the Blackwood estate, near the former site of St. Jude's Chapel, off Highway 37. He hesitated, suddenly realizing how strange his report would sound. I believe someone may be trapped underground. I can hear singing and coughing coming from a vent. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Sir, are you saying you suspect someone is being held against their will? I don't know, Father Elroy admitted, but there seems to be some kind of underground facility, and someone is definitely down there. Given the inaccessibility of the location and its private status, I find it very concerning. The dispatcher, skepticism evident in her tone, asked, Sir, are you on the property legally? Father Elroy grimaced. He had accidentally damaged part of the fence and trespassed onto the property. I understand that I have trespassed. This is troubling, James admitted. What are you going to do? I've already called the police. They're dispatching a patrol car to investigate. I'm coming too, James said decisively. I know that property better than anyone. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Father Elroy thanked him and ended the call. He then got into his car, waiting, running the rosary through his fingers and whispering prayers for whoever might be entombed beneath the ground, where St. Jude's Chapel once stood. Father Elroy sat in his car, parked by the side of the road, his fingers methodically tracing the smooth beads of his rosary as he recited familiar prayers. The ritual brought some comfort to his troubled mind, although questions continued to swirl in his thoughts. Who could be underground at the former chapel site? What purpose could an underground chamber serve in such a secluded location? And, most disturbingly, could there be some... Unless it was done gradually, over time, Father Elroy speculated. Or perhaps there was some kind of natural cavity there already that they expanded. James shook his head incredulously. There aren't any caves or anything like that in this area. It's mostly solid bedrock under a layer of soil. Before they could continue their speculations, the sound of approaching sirens reached their ears. A police car came into view around the bend, its lights flashing, but the siren cut off as the car pulled up beside Father Elroy's vehicle. 2 police officers emerged from the car. One, older, with graying temples. The other, younger and leaner, with a wariness in his movements that suggested a military background. Their badges identified them as officers from the Shasta County Sheriff's Department. Father Elroy? The older officer inquired, approaching him with a professional but non-hostile demeanor. Yes, officer, thank you for coming, Father Elroy said anxiously, indicating his companion. This is James Anderson, the former caretaker of St. Jude's Chapel that used to stand on this land. The senior officer nodded in acknowledgement. I'm Deputy Williams, and this is Deputy Reynolds. The dispatcher indicated you reported sounds coming from an underground space on private property. Could you elaborate on what you encountered? Father Elroy began to recount the circumstances that had led him there. The accidental breach of the fence, the discovery of the vent, and the sounds emanating from beneath the earth. He emphasized his regret for trespassing, a point Deputy Williams waved off with a dismissive flick of his wrist, as if it were a minor formality. "Let's focus on the potential welfare issue first," the deputy said, his tone serious. "If someone is trapped or being held against their will, that takes precedence over any property violation." James, agitated, interjected, "I supported St. Jude's for over 20 years before it was sold. There were never any underground structures associated with the chapel. Whatever's there now was built after Walter Blackwood took possession." The younger officer, Deputy Reynolds, who had been silent and taking notes, looked up, his gaze sharp. "Mr. Blackwood is a prominent landowner in these parts. This is sensitive." "I understand," Father Elroy said solemnly, his voice measured. "I'm not making accusations. I'm simply reporting what I heard and expressing concern for whoever might be down there." Deputy Williams nodded thoughtfully, his face etched with concern. "Fair enough. Let's take a look at this vent you found. Mr. Anderson, since you're familiar with the property, would you mind accompanying us?" "Gladly," James agreed immediately. The four men walked toward the damaged section of the fence. Father Elroy pointed out the break he had inadvertently created, and they carefully stepped onto the Oakhaven property. He led them to a cluster of ornamental bushes that partially concealed the vent. "There it is," he said, pushing aside the branches to reveal a rusted grate. Deputy Williams knelt beside it, examining the vent closely, his eyes reflecting a practiced, wary assessment. "Old work. Doesn't match current landscaping trends at all." Deputy Reynolds directed the beam of his flashlight down into the opening. Nothing. Darkness. The shaft appeared to angle away after only 6 feet. "Listen," Father Elroy urged. "Just be quiet for a moment." The four men stood motionless, straining to hear any sound from below. For nearly a minute they listened intently, the silence broken only by the familiar sounds of the woods. Bird calls, rustling leaves. Father Elroy began to worry that the mysterious inhabitant of the underground space had moved away from the vent, or perhaps fallen silent, hearing voices above. Then, faintly but distinctly, came singing. A woman's voice, thin but haunting, singing a melody that sounded ancient, a fragment of old, sacred music. Father Elroy recognized it instantly, despite the wavering, halting delivery. "Salve Regina," Deputy Williams murmured, a flicker of recognition on his weathered face. James nodded in confirmation. "Yes, a Marian antiphon sung for centuries in monasteries and convents." The singing continued for a few more seconds, and then stopped, replaced by ragged breathing and a dry, rattling cough. The officers exchanged glances. Deputy Reynolds straightened up, his face grave. "There's definitely someone down there, and that cough suggests they may need medical attention." "We need to speak with Mr. Blackwood immediately," Deputy Williams said decisively. "This is a welfare check at the very least." "I don't understand," James said, shaking his head in bewilderment. "That vent wasn't there when the chapel was standing, and there was never a basement or underground room. How could someone be down there?" "That's what we're going to find out," Deputy Williams replied, his voice carrying the resolve of an investigator. "Let's go to the Blackwood residence." The four men headed back toward the road, to their vehicles. Following the deputy's cruiser, Father Elroy and James soon pulled up to Walter Blackwood's main house. The imposing structure seemed even more foreboding than before, its many windows like watchful eyes observing their arrival. Deputy Williams instructed Father Elroy and James to remain near the patrol car while he and Deputy Reynolds approached the front door. Father Elroy watched, holding his breath, as the officers knocked, awaiting an answer. A tension, like an invisible thread, stretched between them, despite their professional demeanor. Several agonizing moments passed before the door finally swung open, but instead of Walter Blackwood, a completely different man stood in the doorway. Father Elroy then saw Blackwood approaching from the rear of the house, still in athletic gear, leading a massive German shepherd on a leash. His face, initially displaying polite curiosity, instantly contorted with anger the moment he spotted Father Elroy and James standing near the car. "What is the meaning of this?" Blackwood demanded menacingly, striding toward the porch. "Why are these trespassers on my land again?" Deputy Williams introduced himself and his partner, explaining the purpose of their visit in carefully measured phrases. "We received a report of sounds emanating from what is believed to be an underground structure on the site of the former chapel. We'd like to ask you a few questions about that, sir." Blackwood's face flushed crimson with rage. "This is outrageous. First, this priest shows up uninvited, climbing my fence and trespassing on my property, and now he's making wild accusations, wasting police resources." "No one is making accusations, Mr. Blackwood," Deputy Reynolds countered calmly. "We're simply investigating a possible distress situation. Apparently someone is in an underground space on your property, and they may require medical assistance." "That's absurd," Blackwood snapped. "There's no one on my property but me and my dogs. I would know if someone was living in a secret underground bunker. Do you realize how ridiculous that sounds?" "Nevertheless, sir, we're obligated to investigate," Deputy Williams stated firmly. "We would like permission to search your home and property, including any basement areas." "Absolutely not," Blackwood retorted, his hand tightening on the dog's leash, causing the animal to shift restlessly. "This is private property. You have no right to search without a warrant." "Mr. Blackwood," Deputy Reynolds began, his tone even but resolute. "If someone is in distress on your property, even a trespasser you aren't aware of, wouldn't you want to find out? It could be a squatter who managed to get into some old structure you might not even be aware of," one of them suggested. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, betraying suspicion. "There are no old structures I'm not aware of. I've owned this land for over a quarter of a century. I know every inch of it." "What about the ventilation shaft near the former chapel?" Deputy Williams inquired, gesturing towards the mysterious opening presumably leading underground. For a fleeting moment, something strange flickered across Blackwood's face, a subtle wavering that Father Elroy didn't miss, before the mask of resolve returned. "I installed a drainage system when I landscaped the property," Blackwood dismissed, dripping with disdain. "What you're calling a ventilation shaft is probably just a decorative grate covering a drain pipe. There's nothing sinister about it." "Drainage systems don't sing hymns and cough, Mr. Blackwood," Deputy Williams remarked dryly. Blackwood glared at Father Elroy as if he was responsible for all the world's evil. This man had undoubtedly orchestrated the whole charade. He must have brought a device that played sounds and placed it near the drain. He was getting back at him for purchasing the church property. "I would never do such a thing," Father Elroy protested, crossing himself. "God is my witness. I heard a woman's voice coming from that vent. We all heard it." Blackwood sneered, his lips twisting in a sardonic smile. "A priest invoking God while trespassing and lying. How predictable." "That's enough, Mr. Blackwood," Deputy Williams interrupted sharply. "We are asking for your cooperation. If you refuse, we will have to pursue other legal avenues." "Then pursue them," Blackwood replied coldly. "In the meantime, I demand that these people leave my property immediately. If they don't leave within 2 minutes, I will sue all of you for trespassing." Understanding the futility of the situation, Deputy Williams nodded to Father Elroy and James, signaling them to return to the vehicles. The officers, maintaining a facade of calm, retreated toward their patrol car. Their measured steps conveyed a strategic withdrawal rather than an admission of defeat. At the patrol car, Deputy Williams lowered his voice, addressing Father Elroy. "Don't worry, Father. This isn't over. I'm going to call dispatch and get information on property records, ownership history, and any prior complaints or incidents at this location. I also want to look into the missing nuns case from 1980. Something is not right here." Father Elroy nodded gratefully, his eyes conveying sincere appreciation. "Thank you, Deputy. I know how strange this sounds, but I feel someone down there needs help." "I believe you," the deputy replied, his gaze filled with understanding. "We all heard something. We'll find out what it is through a thorough investigation. You go back to James for now. We'll be in touch." The drive to James's house passed in silence, filled with tense reflection. Both men were absorbed by the chilling echo of the voice emanating from beneath the former chapel. James's house turned out to be a modest but cozy cabin, set back from the road. Tall pines surrounded it, casting long shadows in the fading sunlight. "Not exactly a palace, but it's home," James said, opening the door for Father Elroy. Inside, the decor was simple but warm. Worn furniture and walls adorned with fishing trophies and photographs created an inviting atmosphere. "Very welcoming," Father Elroy responded sincerely, his gaze drawn to the cross hanging above the stone fireplace. James busied himself in the small kitchen, preparing tea. Father Elroy settled into an armchair. "I salvaged a few things from St. Jude's when the chapel closed," James called over his shoulder. "They're in a chest in the spare room. I'll show you after tea." "Father." Elroy nodded, his thoughts still consumed by the air vent and the haunting voice. "James, why do you think the diocese never informed me about the chapel's sale? I've been at St. Michael's all these years, and my sister was among the missing nuns. Didn't anyone think to consult me?" James returned with 2 steaming cups of tea, handing one to Father Elroy before settling down across from him. The decision came from the heart of the church's power structure, the bishop's office in Sacramento. It was ill-considered, to put it mildly, in my opinion. After the tragic events with the nuns, the parishioners dwindled significantly. And then there was the incident with the bell tower. Father Elroy, gratefully sipping the scalding tea, looked at James expectantly. "What happened there?" "A structural problem," James replied, wincing as if recalling something unpleasant. "The chapel was built in the 1920s, and alas, it hadn't been properly maintained. One Sunday morning in 1981, a huge crack appeared in the bell tower. The old bell, weighing at least 300 pounds, came crashing down, nearly crushing poor Robert Jones, who was acting as caretaker while I was laid up with a broken leg." "Was anyone hurt?" Father Elroy asked anxiously, his expression one of genuine concern. "Thank the Lord, no, but it was the last straw for the diocese. The building was declared unsafe and immediately closed. By early 1982, the decision was made to demolish it completely rather than spend money on costly repairs." Father Elroy frowned, his face etched with deep concern. "And soon after, Walter Blackwood purchased the property." "That's right. Paid cash, as I understand it, and more than the land was worth, which raised a few eyebrows. But the diocese needed funds urgently to repair the cathedral, so they didn't delve too deeply." "What did Blackwood do immediately after the purchase?" James's eyebrows rose, as if trying to recall long-forgotten details. "Tore down the chapel immediately. Had workers there within days. There were protests from locals who felt the building could still be saved, but legally they were powerless. After that, he landscaped the area, but never built anything substantial on the site of the former chapel." "Did you notice any unusual construction activity? Anything that might suggest he was building something underground?" "Nothing obvious," James replied, then hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. "Although, back in '83, people talked about strange noises at night, machinery running and such, and some complained about tremors." Father Elroy leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. "Tremors? Like earthquakes?" "That's what the authorities concluded. Minor seismic activity. But it seemed odd that it was confined to that particular area. Some people speculated that Blackwood was doing some kind of excavation work, but no one investigated." James shrugged, his expression a mix of regret and resignation. The deputy came out, took a look around, found nothing suspicious. It all ended as it usually does. Blackwood, with his connections, making donations in the right places, knowing the right people. The conversation drifted to other topics. The changes in Oak Haven, the dwindling congregation at St. Michael's, and theological discussions that revealed the deep faith of both men. Time flew by, and Father Elroy was surprised when a phone call interrupted their quiet conversation. "Father Smith speaking," he answered. "Father, this is Deputy Williams." The officer's voice was energetic, determined. "I have news. I've spoken with Judge Martinez, and she shares our concerns. We have an emergency welfare check warrant based on reasonable suspicion of unlawful confinement." A spark of hope flickered in Father Elroy's chest. "Excellent news, Deputy. We'll be back at Blackwood's property within the hour. I wanted to inform you, though I must warn you to stay away for safety reasons. It's an official police operation right now." "I understand," Father Elroy replied, though inwardly he was eager to be there. "But Deputy, if you find anything or anyone, you'll be the first civilian I call," Williams promised. "This whole situation started because of your persistence, Father. I appreciate that." After the call, James, having overheard everything, insisted they could at least observe from a distance, arguing that their spiritual presence might be important. If anything was discovered, reluctantly, Deputy Williams agreed, allowing them to stay in the car at a safe distance, purely as observers. An hour later, Father Elroy and James parked on the roadside near the entrance to the Blackwood property. From there, they could see the arriving police cars, including a forensics van and an ambulance parked nearby. This fact sent a cold shiver down Father Elroy's spine. Deputy Williams, like a shadow, glided over to their car. "We're going in with a warrant." His voice was quiet but firm. He adjusted his camera for streaming. "I've set up a live feed on this channel." He demonstrated how Father Elroy could access it on his phone. "Watch from here, but don't come any closer. Understood?" Both men nodded, acknowledging the stern warning. Deputy Williams returned to his colleagues, and they watched with bated breath. The video on the phone screen came to life, showing the officers approaching Blackwood's massive front door, warrant in hand. And then the door swung open. Blackwood's face contorted in a grimace of fury. The sound, though muffled, carried his vehement protests. He shouted about lawsuits, threatening calls to his lawyer. But the officers, ignoring his anger, began their search, methodically examining the house, while Blackwood was forced to remain in the living room, under close supervision. About 45 minutes later, a message came across the screen from Deputy Williams. "House and basement are clear, nothing suspicious." His voice was flat, but there was an underlying tension. "Moving on to the woodland path and outbuildings." Father Elroy and James watched intently. The officers, accompanied by an enraged Blackwood, moved along the woodland path. The path was narrow, winding between old trees, creating a sense of a gloomy tunnel in the twilight. After about 15 minutes, the camera focused on a modest wooden structure, the shed Blackwood had mentioned. It was larger than Father Elroy had imagined, about 20 feet square, with faded siding and a metal roof. "Just a shed," Blackwood's voice came through, dripping with contempt. "Gardening tools, maintenance equipment, a waste of time." The officers began their search. Inside, as Blackwood had claimed, were tools, lawnmowers, and gardening supplies. The dusty, neglected space greeted them with a musty odor and cobwebs, which one of the officers was quick to point out. The search was nearing its end when an unexpected sound shattered the silence. A heavy wrench, slipping from a hand, fell with a thud on the wooden floor. The camera lowered, showing Deputy Reynolds kneeling, listening to the floor. "This section sounds different," he said, setting aside his flashlight and examining the spot where the wrench had fallen. "And the boards look newer than the rest?" Despite Blackwood's objections, the officers began removing the suspicious floorboards. And then, beneath them, a stone staircase leading into the impenetrable darkness was revealed. "Mr. Blackwood," Deputy Williams's voice cut through the silence via the camera's microphone. "Would you care to comment on this?" Blackwood's face paled, his earlier confidence replaced by a tense silence. When he refused to explain, Williams ordered several officers to stay with him while he and Deputy Reynolds prepared to descend. Switching to tactical flashlights, Williams commanded, activating his powerful beam of light. "We're going into the underground passage." The camera showed a narrow stone staircase, carved, it seemed, directly into the rock. The steps, worn in the center, testified to years of use. At the bottom, a heavy wooden door blocked the way. "Locked," Reynolds stated, examining the ancient iron lock. "Mr. Blackwood, we need the key to this door." Blackwood's voice came from above, still retaining a hint of bravado. "I don't know anything about any door. It must have been here when I bought the property." The officers exchanged skeptical glances. Williams gave the order to search for the key. Just then, one of them noticed a small niche in the wall near the staircase, hidden in shadow. Inside, green with age but seemingly functional, lay an iron key. "Found a key," the officer said, handing it to Williams. With a heart full of trepidation, the deputy inserted the key into the lock. A metallic clang, like a scream, shattered the silence as the lock yielded. The door, like the maw of a monster, swung inward, swallowing the light and revealing a path into impenetrable darkness. "We are entering a man-made tunnel." Williams's voice, previously confident, now sounded subdued and tense. "It's about 6 feet high and 3 feet wide. The walls are made of stone and earth, supported by wooden beams at regular intervals. It appears to be a relatively recent construction, despite attempts to make it look older." The officers, like shadows, cautiously stepped into the tunnel. Each footstep echoed in the narrow space. The tunnel curved slightly, and Father Elroy, feeling a chill in his chest, realized it was heading toward where the chapel once stood. After several minutes, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. The light from the flashlights revealed a sparse setting: a thin mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, a table with the remains of a meal. Then, from the darkness, a faint trembling voice called out, "Help! Is anyone there?" Williams directed his flashlight toward the sound. In the light, a frail, elderly woman lay on the mattress. Her face, gaunt and pale, expressed fear and caution. Her gray hair was cropped short. She clutched a carved wooden rosary in her hands. "Madam," Williams said gently, approaching slowly, trying not to frighten her. "I'm Deputy Williams from the Shasta County Sheriff's Office. We're here to help you. Can you tell me your name, please?" Her chapped lips moved, forming words with visible effort. "Sister Alice, Alice." In James's car, Father Elroy gasped, as if struck by lightning. His hand flew to his mouth. Tears, like pearls, glistened in his eyes. He whispered, his voice trembling, "My sister. It's my sister." James placed a hand on his shoulder, his expression reflecting shock and disbelief. Through the camera feed they could see that the small room was decorated with religious carvings. Crosses, saints, biblical scenes, all apparently made from scraps of wood and stone. On a makeshift table, like a mockery of the darkness, stood a charred candle stub. On the wall, carved into the stone, was a cross, a symbol of faith in the darkest place. "Sister," Deputy Williams's voice was professional, but tinged with genuine concern. "We're going to get you medical attention right away. Is there anyone else here with you?" The woman's gaze, fixed on a dark corner of the chamber, where only a faint light penetrated, revealed the answer before she could speak. "Evelyn," she whispered, her voice hoarse, as if from ages ago, "but she hasn't been with God for many years." The camera panned to the dark corner, revealing a chilling sight. A skeleton resting on a makeshift mattress, partially covered by a tattered blanket. All that remained of a human life. "We need a medical team in here, immediately," Williams ordered over the radio, barely suppressing his emotion. "And notify the forensics team about the human remains." Unable to restrain himself any longer, Father Elroy, like a released spring, jumped out of the car, ignoring James's protests. He rushed toward the police cordon, where an officer tried to stop him. "Please," Father Elroy pleaded, his voice trembling with emotion. "That's my sister. They've found her. I'm Father Elroy Smith. She disappeared 28 years ago. I have to see her." The officer, recognizing the name from the briefing, contacted his superiors. After a brief consultation, he led Father Elroy through the cordon, to where the forensics team and paramedics were preparing to enter the tunnel. "Wait here, Father," the officer instructed. "They'll bring her out soon." Time stretched into agonizing slowness. Father Elroy prayed, trying to grasp the reality of what was happening. Each second felt like an eternity. Finally, there was movement at the entrance to the shed. Officers appeared, followed by paramedics, carefully carrying a stretcher. On it lay Sister Alice, so frail, so emaciated, that her silhouette was barely visible under the blanket. As they passed Father Elroy, Sister Alice's head turned slightly. Their eyes met. Despite the ravages of time and suffering, he recognized her, his sister. In those eyes, once sparkling with youthful devotion, now lay the depth of an incomprehensible experience. Her lips trembled, and although no sound came out, Father Elroy read the words in them. "God never left me." The paramedics hurried to the waiting ambulance. Another group emerged from the shed, carrying a body bag, the remains of Sister Evelyn, Father Elroy assumed. A fresh wave of grief washed over Father Elroy, but it was tempered by the awe of a miracle. His sister had survived. In the midst of the commotion, he saw Walter Blackwood, in handcuffs, being led away. The man's arrogant demeanor had been replaced by grim resignation. As Blackwood passed Father Elroy, he suddenly lunged forward and spat in the priest's face, saliva running down his cheek. "Are you proud of yourself, Father?" Blackwood snarled before the officers pulled him away. Father Elroy calmly wiped his face, his voice remaining even, like the placid surface of a lake. "I find joy in this, that I have suffered as my Lord did." As Blackwood was led away, Father Elroy caught snippets of the officers' conversation. They were discussing a discovery, another skeleton in another chamber. Likely it was the remains of Sister Evelyn, given the age. "I must call St. Michael's," he suddenly realized. "The parishioners must know she's been found." He reached for the phone, but it rang first. Deputy Williams's number flashed on the screen. "Deputy," Father Elroy answered. "I'm at the hospital. My sister is being taken care of by the doctors now." "Glad to hear it, Father," Williams replied. "I'm calling to give you an update on the investigation. We have Walter Blackwood in custody, but he's refusing to speak without a lawyer. However, we found something significant while searching his home more thoroughly. A diary. It seems he's been keeping detailed records for decades." Father Elroy felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of records?" "Disturbing content, Father. The diary is full of entries detailing his hatred for the Catholic Church and religious women in particular. There are entries from the late 70s describing his obsession with the nuns at St. Jude's." "But why?" Father Elroy asked, trying to comprehend the depth of hatred that could drive such atrocities. What was his motivation? There was a pause on the line before Williams continued. According to his writings, Blackwood's mother abandoned him as soon as he was born, leaving him in the care of his grandmother. His mother became a nun. He never knew her, never even saw her. The grandmother who raised him was, by all accounts, a strict Catholic who didn't shy away from physical punishment in the name of religious upbringing. The boy developed a pathological hatred for nuns, especially because he saw them as women who had abandoned their natural duties to family. Father Elroy closed his eyes, a wave of bitterness washing over him. "Such brokenness," he murmured. "Such twisted thinking." "There's more, Father." William's voice darkened. "The diary details what happened to the other nuns. 2 of the elder sisters, Evelyn Baxter and Carol Sterling, died, apparently, within the first year of their captivity. Given their age and the conditions, that's not surprising." "May their souls rest in peace," Father Elroy whispered, crossing himself, his lips moving in silent prayer. Sister Elaine lasted longer, almost a decade, according to Blackwood's entries. She died in the early 90s from what appears to have been an untreated respiratory infection. "And my sister? How did she survive when the others didn't?" Williams hesitated again. "Father, there are aspects of Blackwood's diary that are particularly distressing. He seems to have developed a fixation on Sister Alice. He kept her separated from the others, especially after Sister Elaine's death. There are photographs in the diary suggesting he subjected her to degrading treatment." Father Elroy gasped, nausea rising in his throat. "God, no." "I'm very sorry, Father. The evidence indicates he subjected her to physical and psychological abuse for many—" "Your sister nearly escaped. She fought back, almost made it to the door, but he struck her on the head and knocked her unconscious and later drugged her." Father Elroy winced, imagining the horror his sister had experienced. He transported them through the service corridor in the old chapel, loading them into his vehicle at night. He systematically destroyed all the evidence in the chapel, erasing any trace of the crime. Bags, letters, bedding, anything that could expose him was burnt. Even the floors were scrubbed with lye to ensure no hint remained of what had transpired. By the time the alarm was raised, there was simply no trace. And the police? Father Elroy couldn't mask the bitterness, recalling the initial weeks of the investigation, when he had felt so helpless. Policing in a rural area in 1980 was very different from what it is today, Williams explained. Resources were scarce, forensic science was in its infancy, and case management left much to be desired. When the initial search turned up nothing, the case quickly went cold. Blackwood himself was never considered a suspect. He was wealthy, respected in the community, with no prior criminal record. And then he bought the chapel using a shell corporation. Like pieces of a puzzle falling into place, Father Elroy understood. He tore it down so no one would search there again, he concluded. Exactly. After purchasing the land, he built the underground chambers and the tunnel connecting them to his warehouse. That explains the reports of nighttime construction and vibrations in 1983. "How did no one notice?" James exclaimed, indignant. Father Elroy glanced at Williams, who sighed. "I'm ashamed to admit it, but Blackwood's diary suggests he was bribing officials to ignore complaints and turn a blind eye to what was happening. We are thoroughly investigating these allegations now." The conversation was interrupted by a doctor in surgical scrubs, who appeared with a tablet in her hands. "Are you Mr. Morrow's father, Alice's sister's brother?" Father Elroy, after promising Williams a quick meeting, turned to the doctor. "Yes, that's me. How is my sister?" Dr. Chen, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes but a serious expression, sat down opposite them. "I must be frank with you. Your sister is stable, but her health is severely compromised. She is severely malnourished, has significant muscle atrophy, vitamin D deficiency due to lack of sunlight, and shows signs of healed fractures that were never treated." Father Elroy nodded, trying to grasp the extent of the calamity that had befallen his sister. Dr. Chen continued, her voice calm and professional. "The most pressing issue is adapting to a normal environment. After decades underground, her immune system is extremely weak. We must be extremely careful to avoid infections, and her eyes will be sensitive to light." Father Elroy's voice cracked as he asked, "When can I see her?" "She's in the ICU right now," Dr. Chen replied. Visitors are a significant risk. Anyone who enters will have to wear protective gear, a mask, gown, gloves. Even with these precautions, visits will be very short. I understand, Father Elroy replied, feeling despair rising in his chest. 28 years of waiting, and now a few more hours. But he was willing to wait if it meant her safety. Dr. Chen smiled softly, her eyes conveying understanding. She was calling for you. You know, one of her first words was your name. She knew you would find her. Tears welled up in Father Elroy's eyes when he heard that. She had never lost hope. Apparently not, Dr. Chen agreed. The paramedics reported that she was clutching rosary beads made of wood scraps and thread. She wouldn't let go of them even during first aid. That sounds like her, Father Elroy whispered, a sad smile flickering across his face. Her faith has always been stronger than mine, even as a child. You'll be able to see her in about an hour, Dr. Chen promised, rising. A nurse will come for you. As the doctor left, Father Elroy turned to James. Would you mind if I went to the chapel? I need to pray. Of course, James replied. I'll wait here in case there's any news. Father Elroy made his way to the small hospital chapel. Finding it empty, he knelt before the simple altar and bowed his head, his lips whispering, trembling with emotion. Thank you, Lord, for this miracle. Thank you for saving my sister in her hour of trial. Thank you for bringing me to her after so many years. Father Elroy's voice trailed off as he sank into silent prayer, grappling with a storm of emotions. The joy of reuniting with his sister mingled with sorrow for her suffering. Anger simmered in his heart at the thought of her kidnapper, and questions about why God had allowed such evil tormented his soul. But gradually, a sense of peace washed over him. The mysteries of God's ways remained inscrutable, and Father Elroy realized that some questions he might never find answers to in this life. What mattered now was that his sister had been found, and, incredibly, her faith had endured, unbroken in the utter darkness. When he returned to the waiting room, James was talking to a nurse who was about to escort Father Elroy to the ICU. Donning the protective suit, he followed her through a series of doors, ending up in a private room. There, surrounded by medical equipment, lay his sister. The figure in the bed bore only a faint resemblance to the energetic young woman who had disappeared 28 years ago. Alice's face was gaunt, her skin pale from decades spent without sunlight. But when she opened her eyes and met her brother's gaze, Father Elroy recognized in them the inner light that had always distinguished his sister, a spiritual radiance that even the darkest captivity could not extinguish. Elroy, she whispered, her voice weak but clear. You found me. Tess, he replied, tears streaming down his face beneath the protective mask as he gently took her frail hand in his gloved one. I never stopped looking, never stopped praying. A shadow of a smile appeared on her cracked lips. I knew you wouldn't give up. I told Elaine. God would send you to us sooner or later. I'm so sorry it took so long. Father Elroy's voice trembled. Sister Alice shook her head slightly. God's time. Perfect. Always perfect. The nurse touched Father Elroy's shoulder, signaling that his time was up. He nodded in understanding. I'll be waiting right outside the door, he promised his sister. I'm not leaving this hospital. We have a lot to talk about when you get better. Tell me, Sister Alice whispered, as Father Elroy was about to leave, as if afraid to break the silence. The church. Is it still strong? Beneath the mask that concealed his face, Father Elroy smiled. His gaze softened, filling with warmth and compassion. The gates of hell have not overcome her, he replied, quoting the words of Christ himself from the Gospel of Matthew. His voice was firm and confident, like a rock upon which faith stands. Rest, sister. God is with you, and so am I. He nodded slightly, bowing his head in respect and farewell, and left the room. Once in the corridor, Father Elroy felt a profound astonishment. His sister's first concern, despite all her suffering, was not for herself, but for the Church. This struck him to the core. Her devotion, her faith, seemed to know no bounds. He felt his heart fill with reverence for this woman. Her priorities remained unwavering, despite all the trials. It was a testament to a faith that soared above any circumstance, a faith that had sustained her through 28 long years of darkness. And now, that same faith was leading her back to the light.